Again, thank you for coming. Now to begin, let me just say, our two guests I've known a rather long time. And in reference to our first guest, she decided to run for the school board some time back. And so she said, would you come and introduce me, which I was honored to do. She's had an extraordinary public career. I don't think in this city we fully appreciate how lucky we are to have someone like her and our other guests represent us in the Congress of the United States, especially in these tumultuous, turbulent, upside down, can anything else go wrong world. It's reassuring that they're there. Welcome, please, Congresswoman Susan Davis.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good evening. It's great to see you. And, it's particularly always wonderful to have George introduce you. And that's really why, many years ago, golly, it's a long time ago, that I had seen George introduce people before, and that's where I thought, gosh, maybe it's worth running for this office if he can get up and introduce me. How nice that would be. He's kind of like a maestro, It's just he just conducts a room, right? I mean, it's just amazing. And I had a chance to be part of the City Club for many years. I really enjoyed it. It was always different. Like you never really knew, just like you never really knew who was going to be funny and who was going to be good and everything. Some of them were very familiar names, but now and then not so familiar. And, everybody went away feeling that they had gotten something out of the day, out of the evening, out of the lunch, whatever that was. And I know it's morphed over the years and changed, and it's been a while, and George was reminding me that, yes, I have to sign up. And join. And the other thing that's great is that we have a number of students here tonight. Can all the students just wave at me so I know where you are? Okay, because I know you're going to have the tougher questions. So but I'm glad you're here, and we're counting on you. We really are. We need you to be future leaders. You're probably already a leader in your own right on many levels, but we need you to be there. And it's so interesting today because one of the things that I hear from people a lot is they say, I've got to get involved. And this is, if there's a silver lining right now, and I don't find too many, but if there's a silver lining, it's because we have a lot more groups involved and people involved. And some of them are new groups. Out of a number of people who I saw today, had a lot of meetings in the office, two of them were very familiar groups or new groups that are really gaining some prominence in our neighborhoods and everywhere. And I also had a group from the League of Women Voters. And as George well knows, when people ask me, how did you get there? Why did you do this? I always remind them, number one, I never, ever thought I would be in politics, truly. But what helped me to think about the city and to want to deal with policy issues and meet people who were stimulating and interesting and have good discussions all came through the League of Women Voters. My husband and I had arrived in San Diego, didn't know a soul. I met someone at the kids' preschool who said, come, join me at a league meeting. And, I was sold. I remind people they also had babysitting, which made a really big difference when you have two toddlers. But it made a difference. And I was so pleased today because I had a large group of leaguers because their ranks have swelled as a result of what's going on right now. And that's amazing because for years, groups like League and others have just struggled to bring new people and new blood, new energy into their organizations. And here we have it. So I think we have to hold on to that. We have to encourage people to be involved. And I think we have to not necessarily agree with them on everything that they would like us to do, but be very supportive of the fact that they're as involved as they are. And I'm just really excited about that. As you can imagine, it has been really stressful lately. Some people always ask me, they probably ask, they ask Scott too, about my mental health lately. That's not why I live with a psychiatrist, but but it is harder today, and people are wondering a lot, what's going on and how are you dealing with this? Well, as I say, things have never been as bad, I think, for most people in the Congress. But having people engage the way they are begins to somehow make some of that not change, because I think we all have a lot of work to do, but it helps a little bit. We'll be back in session next week on Tuesday evening. We'll go in, and probably will be a bit of a wild ride, I'm sure. We have to reach agreement to fund the government and raise the debt ceiling, big chore. And the president is talking about having the Congress move on a major tax overhaul all at the same time. And the reality is we really only have 2 weeks there, like 3 or 4 days of the next of the 2 weeks once we get back. And then we actually have a recess, short recess period. And then we come back, and those are the deadlines. So I'm not exactly sure how they're going to do this, but we're there to work with them, and I think we really are devoted to doing that. We want to be sure. But the problem that we've seen with all of this, of course, is that the president, at the same time that he's talking about getting these things done, is also threatening to shut down the government if the spending bill doesn't include his border wall. Added to that now, of course, is everything that's happening with Houston. So I'm not exactly sure. My sense of that, as with other bills that are important, is it should be a standalone bill. We shouldn't marry it to something else. It's important enough to do the right thing by those appropriations and not to wave it into something else. And usually it's something that we really don't want to do. In this case, people want to be helpful and supportive, I know, to Houston, but we'll see. The other story that we've seen before, that we've lived through, is what a shutdown does to the community. It cost our country $24 billion in 2013 when we shut down the government. Imagine what you would do with that. And there was no reason for it. And it was really costly. It hurt our seniors, it hurt our veterans. I remember being at SPAWAR, our space warfare, down by the airport. And what happened with that was so interesting, because they work with a lot of industries, and the industries were coming there, and nobody was home, basically. So they couldn't do the projects that they were going to do. It really makes a difference. So with him, President threatening to shut down the government over a wall that we don't need, and coming forth with a lot of simplistic, solutions to complex problems, and that's really difficult. And also, more importantly, we know that it's just a very irresponsible thing to do. And so I'm hoping that we're not going to be dealing with poison pills. That's bad policy. Anybody can tell you that's not the way to run the government, and we don't think it's certainly the way to run any businesses. We need a clean debt ceiling bill. I think Secretary Mnuchin has talked about that. And I think that we really want to be focusing on the economy. That's what we all need to do. Here in San Diego, we're pretty fortunate. I mean, we have a better situation than a lot of cities across the country, but we also know that there's still a lot of people that are hurting. There's still a lot of people who are saying, I haven't had a wage increase in many, many, many years. Housing is very expensive here in San Diego. So we have our own reasons to be very focused on the economy. And everybody wants a strong economy. They want affordable housing. They want to be able to send their kids to college without amassing massive debt. And that's really what we're dealing with. The other thing that, of course, we're all dealing with is health care. And you can probably ask some questions around that. And when I think about health care, actually, I think about George. Because in 2009, I don't know how many of you recall what was going on in the country, maybe a little like what was happening quite a few months ago, especially among some districts throughout the country and even here in San Diego. Maybe it's even happening a little bit this last week. But we had congressional town halls, and we had set up a town hall in Lemon Grove at the library, thinking that, you know, it would be a community that we hadn't had as much chance to spend time in. We expected maybe 30, 40 people, and so that's why we did it at the library. And in the course of about a week, maybe even fewer days than that, the numbers for town halls were starting to swell around the country. So fortunately, we realized early enough that we needed not a library room, but we needed the Boys and Girls Club that was out there in Spring Valley. And we ended up with about 1,200 people, 70 sheriffs assigned to be there with us. And fortunately, I had George because George was able to MC that with me a little bit. I mean, we somehow managed to get through it. I guess it was about an hour and a half to 2 hours of screaming people. And that was just a memorable day. And I even run into people today, this is the weirdest thing, who say to me, I was there, I was at your town hall. And they were supportive of me, but I felt like there wasn't a soul in the audience who was supportive. And then I remember a woman coming up at the very end, and she, you know, kind of, she didn't give me a hug exactly, but she kind of reached out to me and she said, oh, you did a really good job. And I thought, oh my gosh, lady, you were screaming at me the whole time. But here we are again. Here we are again with the Affordable Care Act. And I think our interest here is certainly to find the best way to sort of stabilize the markets throughout the country. There was a lot of you know, sabotage, let's call it what it was, to sort of send some of these companies packing so that they wouldn't be providing the health care that people had really been applying for and wanting to be part of. So we had, you know, we have places, not California, but we have places throughout the country that maybe ended up with one plan. And that's not good, that's not competitive for the people there, and so we have to change that. So, you know, tens of millions of people have gotten health care. We do need to stabilize it. We do need to make some changes, and we'll be working on that. The NDAA, maybe Scott will talk a little bit about the GI benefits that were changed. Really some good work done, I think, in the Armed Services Committee, particularly around families that really affects people here in San Diego. The Forever GI Bill, so that it doesn't go away. You know, there aren't deadlines, and people can really access it the way that we want. And the other thing I just briefly wanted to talk about, because I made that was a kind of a tough decision, actually, at the beginning of this term, to change the subcommittee that I had an opportunity to be the ranking member for. You know, our lingo in the Congress is if your party's in control, you get to be chairperson of a subcommittee or a committee if you know, if your time comes up and your colleagues want you to be in that position. The way we talk about the non-majority person, the minority member, is that they're the ranking member. So I was able to be the ranking member on Armed Services in Personnel since '07. And that was an extraordinary opportunity because we were in charge then. And that's why we repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I can assure you, had we not been in charge, that would have never happened. We would never have gotten the Congress to support that, but because we were in charge, we were able to do that. And I had the chance to even go up against my chairman at that time, who was a gentleman from Illinois, and he actually would have been in a tough position. He was defeated in the next round, partly because of his support for, you know, in the committee, even though he actually never came out to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But it was something important, and there were a lot of other changes that we made in sexual assault in the military. But looking at that and feeling that we had made some accomplishments, I had a chance to go to I was on the Education Committee to be the subcommittee ranking on that, on higher education. And in that capacity now, what I'm doing and putting a lot of effort into, and we just spent a day yesterday, is exploring how we how we include more pathways to work and study for young people that go beyond 2- and 4-year institutions, so that we begin to look at apprenticeships differently. We don't think, sometimes people think of them only as the trades today, but there are lots of different ways of thinking about apprenticeships. And we have a number that I'm discovering here in San Diego that most people may not know about. And they're some of our kind of major service organizations, but it's a way of really engaging young people at a much earlier time, and then hopefully engaging parents and teachers in helping people sort of make some of those decisions about their own pathways, and that they know that, you know, maybe instead of starting out at a 2- or 4-year institution, they actually do start out in an apprenticeship. They're earning and learning at the same time. A lot of that debt that goes away for young people, and then they can make those decisions down the line, but they start out with a really good skill at a job that pays about $70,000 a year. Not a bad way to begin, but I think that as an option has just not been all that public for people. And what I'm trying to do on that committee then is to make that change, so that apprenticeships are not just part of workforce engagement, but they're really part of what we think of as higher education. And hopefully that's going to be a change, and I'm kind of excited about that. And if you have information, you know, please let me know. Infrastructure, we're interested in working on that as well. Tax reform, always a good thing in the eye of the beholder, right? So we hear a lot of discussions, and Scott and I both work with a group of Republicans that are trying to find some consensus as we talk about tax reform. The problem for that is that they're looking at local and state governments and not including the ability for people to deduct their state and local taxes. That's a big hit on Californians, so we've got to be careful with that. And some folks are still talking about mortgage reductions and wanting to eliminate that. It's a hard area. I would love it if we could do something in this area to really help businesses and to help out people generally. We just want to be sure that it doesn't just help those who are doing fabulously well in our country and leave everybody out. It's not going to happen under our watch, I think. And so trying to stay focused on the economy and doing the right thing by everybody in our country. We really are in this together, and I think we have to find a way that we create. And you might have heard, you know, the Democrats are talking about a better way, a better deal for people. And I think that, you know, we all feel seriously that that's something that we want to work on. Infrastructure is a big part of that, as well as trying to find the very best way, I think, to do tax reform and to make sure that people have a hope for the future, that they really believe that their retirement and their kids' future is in good hands. And I know that everybody in their family wants to be able to do that. Thank you all so much for your time this evening. And I know that, I'm assuming, George, that we're going to have questions later. Is that right?
We'll do
okay.
Scott first.
Sure.
We have parents and students from Country Day. They're an important part of what we've done. And I was thinking that one of the most significant programs we ever did was we invited 4 graduates of Country Day who had gone on to college to speak about their experiences. One was from Stanford, one from Yale, editor of the Yale Daily News, one from Harvard, and one from Tufts. 2 of them have become lifelong friends of mine. They were incredibly impressive. This school and the students are special. And Jonathan Schulman is the history teacher, just an extraordinary guy. So we love having Country Day and other public schools, which we have had many over the years. Now to introduce our next speaker, let me say that when I chaired the committee to get a ballpark downtown for the Padres, it was very controversial, but I had been born at 10th and G Street, I knew that part of our city was unchanged in my lifetime. And we were able to get a 59.7% vote in a conservative city like San Diego, no small thing. And our next speaker was a key part of that. And then when I chaired the effort to get strong mayor government, he was again a key part of that. Was elected to the city council and now is in Congress. And he's just like Susan, he's just really extraordinary. Welcome, Scott Peters.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me. Susan did a really good job, and by the way, it's a pleasure to be a colleague of Susan's who's very modest about her own achievement and stature. When I was on the Armed Services Committee, I was in the front row, and she was way, 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 way up in the back row, because I think she's now, third or fourth in seniority among the Democrats. And she carries a lot of leverage, and she's a recognized leader on both that and education. So she's been good to me and showing me the ropes. When I came to Congress, it was my intention to work on the areas where San Diego intersected with Washington, D.C. What are those? Well, our economy is tourism, the military, science and innovation. So I worked really hard to try to make sure that the nation continues to invest in San Diego, particularly in basic scientific research, to support all those great grants from the NIH that fuel those discoveries on Torrey Pines Mesa. We want to make sure that we maintain our good relationship with the military. Today I greeted Secretary Spencer, the new Secretary of the Navy, which was great. We want to take care of our veterans. We have 235,000 or so veterans in San Diego County. We want to make sure they get jobs. We want to make sure that they get health care. We want to make sure that when things go wrong for them, they're not homeless and they're not committing suicide. And I have a particular interest in climate and the environment. That was my background before I went into public service. We need sensible climate policy. We in San Diego and in California, we understand you don't have to choose between a prosperous economy and a clean environment. In fact, you can't do without both of them. And so I'm working on that. When my first term was, this is my third term, my first term, people asked me about it. I said the biggest surprise for me was cultural. I mean, I came from this area, San Diego, which is a naturally collaborative place. It's creative. We don't sit around the table asking what school you went to or what rank you're in. But of course, that's what happens in Washington, D.C. And they want to know, like, what's your rank? Who do you work for? How long have you been here? If you tell me what your job title is, maybe I'll tell you if you have a good idea. It's very hierarchical. It's also very partisan. It's much more partisan than I was used to when I was the city council president here. Someone said, I think Pete Wilson said, there's no such thing as a Republican or Democratic sewer pipe. So by nature, those problems are less partisan. But we also know that Congress was less partisan some time ago. I was surprised by that. And in my first term, the Republican leadership in the House, you'd often hear them blaming Harry Reid and Barack Obama. In my second term, Harry Reid wasn't the leader of the Senate anymore, but they blamed Barack Obama. And now the Republican Party is the dog that caught the car. They have the House, the Senate, and the White House. But it's less functional than ever. So we could talk about some of the business issues that Susan raised. I think it's going to be a chaotic summer because there's some things we have to, September, some things we have to get done. But it's a very important time for the country. It's a time where we're going through some tough self-reflection. Partly it's because, instead of concentrating on getting things done, which I still do, and we did have a big win on veterans, extending the GI Bill and making some real improvements, Purple Heart recipients and so forth. Unanimous, bipartisan, that can happen. But on health care, you saw kind of the model that we didn't want to see, which was the Republicans would not release to us their draft health care bill. In fact, it came out on a Monday, and before that Monday night, if you wanted to look at the health care bill, you had to be a Republican and you had to look at it in a secure room without being able to take notes or take a copy of the document away. That's the treatment we give to a classified document. They released it on Monday night, and then we scheduled our hearing in the Energy and Commerce Committee for Tuesday or for Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. Virtually no time to look at this document. But the Democrats, we on the committee, we started to delay it because we thought the more time we had, the more time we'd have to hear from people. And sure enough, on our cell phones and little monitors showed up that the doctors hated it, the patients hated it, the Planned Parenthood hated it, Catholic Charities hated it, insurance companies hated it. It was a bad idea. But almost passed, almost passed. I think we're going to see the same kind of routine on tax reform, which is too bad because I think there's a lot we could do if we work together on it. And a lot of that is driven by what's happened at the other end of the street. Whatever you think of President Trump, I'm not a particularly big fan of his character, his leadership, his experience, his positions, certainly the way he treats people. Whatever you think of that, a lot of my friends said, I'm going to vote for Trump because he's a business guy, right? You know, he's going to run the government like a business. And what we've learned about President Trump is that he ran an investment business, a family investment business in a living room, talking to his family and not trusting many people and sort of not paying a lot of other people that were working for him. And he's trying to run the federal government like a living room investment business, and it doesn't work like that. So the chaos just in terms of management is astounding. We can't get any direction. He doesn't weigh in on the health care bill. The tax reform proposal he gave us was a one-page, you know, we say the comprehensive one-pager, $18 trillion economy. So that makes it very, very difficult to get anything done. In addition to the awful, awful hatefulness that he's drawn out of his party, you can't really think about what's happening in Washington without thinking about what happened in Charlottesville. Charlottesville, you know, wasn't really about statues. Statues was about it was an event that happened because of a statue, but it really was about much more than that. It really was about hatred and racism. And as much as we are proud of where we've come as a country, how far we've come, and John Lewis will tell you this too, it's not as bad as it was. Come a long way. You can buy a house in La Jolla if you're African American or Jewish, or in Southfield, Michigan, where my father worked on housing desegregation. We even had an African American president. We've come a long way. But what we saw in Charlottesville was a reminder that there's a lot of hatred and cancerous sickness in our democracy today that we still have to fight. The fight for democracy is still an experiment. We each have to fight for our democracy every day. And the response of the president was to play to the mob. And I think that's another challenge for the government right now, is even when you looked at something like the Paris Agreement, the traditional Republican constituencies all said, don't leave the Paris Agreement. As long as we're signed the Paris Agreement, everyone else is playing by it. We want to take advantage of all of the opportunities that agreement provides for us. We want to be in the lead of this. We don't want to be following it. That's all of what he heard, even from Ivanka and Jared. But from energy companies, he heard that. And what he listened to, though, was the mob. And that's a voice that's playing a prominent role in our government right now. And then we saw with the pardon of Joe Arpaio, who is the record is terrible of what he did. But from a lawyer's perspective, he disobeyed the order of a federal judge. This is a constitutional bedrock. The rule of law is really what separates us from other countries. And the ability that no one is, the concept that no one is above the law is just so fundamental. And to take this action with respect to an ongoing legal proceeding for someone convicted like that of disregarding the law, disregarding the constitutional rights of people, was the finding. It wasn't that he had a parking ticket or something like that. He had violated people's constitutional rights, and he's being absolved in effect by this pardon. It's a real threat. It's a real threat. So I say to you that it's a huge honor to represent the 52nd District in San Diego in the United States Congress. I had a lot of hard time convincing people that it was an important job. And Donald Trump helped do that. People are really engaged. And Susan, I'll tell my my town hall attendance story, and would love to take your questions. And this is the good news, is that, well, when I was first elected in 2013, took office in 2013, we scheduled a town hall in Scripps Ranch Library. We figured that's what you do. And when you schedule a town hall, everyone will want to come out and hear about what's going on in Congress. And so we advertised the heck out of it. We told everybody in Scripps Ranch, come out, Congress in your community, come meet your Congress member. And we had 6 staffers, 2 cops, and 4 community members. And the 4 community members were all telling me that Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. That was what they wanted to tell me. So we decided pretty quickly that was a bad model for us, and we transitioned to something we called Congress in Your Company. And we've had a great time visiting companies and nonprofits. Actually, we've also visited La Jolla Country Day School a couple times. But talking to people who want to hear from you and where they are, and that seems to work really well. Well, when Trump got elected, Marianne is in the back and runs all my politics. She says, I think we should have a town hall. I said, I don't think so. That was such a waste of time. It's just so much work for nothing. She says, no, I think people are going to want to have a town hall. I said, okay. So we got a room at the Islamic Community Center in Claremont, which was not for the symbolism, though we did not mind the symbolism of having an Islamic center. But they had a room for 350 people. And I called Marianne up from Washington a couple nights later, and I said, well, how's it looking? She says, Scott, we've already sold out. We've totally subscribed. We can't fit any more people in. And the other thing is, since I'm a moderate Democrat, I'm a pro-trade Democrat. I mean, Susan's kind of a pro-trade. She's a pro-trade Democrat too. Sometimes Democrats get cranky because I'm not 100%, down the line. And so sometimes I worry when I go into a partisan group that I'm going to get a mixed reception. Well, I walk into this room, and it's like I won the war. They're on their feet, This is the greatest thing ever. This is great. So I said to Marianne, when's our next town hall? And so we did it with Susan. We did a joint town hall with Susan, 900 people. We did another one in Scripps Ranch at the same library, which we didn't advertise at all, 175 people. We did one at Claremont High School, 650 people. Another one at Claremont High School, 600 people. And the good news is that the democracy has been awoken, and people are paying attention. They're not taking it for granted. And I can tell you that it's important that we all catch that wave and stay on it, because we've got some work to do to defend that precious democracy that so many people have died for over the last 250 years. I would be happy to take questions with Susan if that's okay. George?
I'm going to come to you, but I want to ask a question. We had Senator Mike Bennett at the Denver Forum a week ago yesterday, a centrist Democrat, extraordinarily impressive guy. One of the things he said is, what we forget, there are 330 million people in America, only 3 million of whom watch Fox and MSNBC. So I'd like to ask either of you, are some of us better off not to watch MSNBC because I'm not watching Fox?
If you're better off not to watch?
Right.
I'll just, well, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think what's happened, we're sorting ourselves constantly. And that's obvious on MSNBC. And sometimes I'm watching it, even though I actually agree mostly with what they're saying, they are making really strident political commentary. And there's just no doubt about it. I think, if it walks like a duck, it's just, that's what's happening. So I really don't watch Fox. I have to admit that. I do go on local Fox sometimes. But that troubles me, actually, that we're sorting as much as we are all the time. And it's very difficult for people to communicate with folks who really don't agree with them. Most of us just frankly avoid it. And I have to force myself with my colleagues sometimes. There are some opportunities that, we all seek out, because that helps a lot, because there's sort of a commonality in what we're doing, and you can can have those discussions, and you can ask, some pretty direct questions, mostly about the president, like, oh, how did you feel when he said this kind of stuff. But I do think we're sorting, and it's going to be to all the young people here, take every opportunity that you can to talk to people who don't necessarily agree with you. Get out of your comfort zone and do that as much as you can. It's not easy, but I think it's important.
I think I'd add to that, when we grew up, we had Walter Cronkite. I think my parents were Huntley and Brinkley people, right? We all operated from the same set of facts. And then, when we went to church, the Republicans were less interested in government playing a role. The Democrats wanted the government to help out a little bit more. We're kind of in between the 30-yard lines. Now it's all over the board. And so what I want to say to the young people, because I realize they've never been in that situation of sort of accepted journalism, is at least read two things. You can pretty much count on, if you read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, you're going to get true reporting that's checked, and you're going to get two perspectives, but they're going to be reasonable. And so don't just watch one thing, and don't be like my wife, who can't turn off MSNBC. It's really helping the mental health providers, I think. They're bumming around.
Yes.
Scott, when you spoke at CBI a year or two ago, you talked about you had developed a relationship with Paul Ryan. What's your relationship today with Paul?
So my relationship with Paul Ryan, my relationship with Paul Ryan, just real briefly, one of the things that you have in Congress is a congressional gym. The gym is like a high school gym in the basement of a building. It's really nothing fancy, but the great thing about it is that there's no lobbyists and no staff members. So the first morning I went in there, I like to go in the morning. I tapped on a guy's shoulder, ended up being Tim Murphy. I didn't know who it was, a colleague of ours from Pennsylvania. I said, "Where's the weight bench?" He said, "Well, the weight bench is in there, but why don't you work, if you're going to work your chest, why don't you work out with us? We're doing chest and back." I said, "Hey, make new friends, So he says, "Go stand next to Paul. He's a good teacher." So I go extend my hand to Paul. It's Paul Ryan, fresh off of not being vice president. And he says, "Stand here, Scott, I'll show you what to do." So I did this P90X class with him for a long time in my first term, and then we moved into a place that had our own gym. But the greatest thing about that was Paul Ryan, when I was standing with a bunch of Democrats, I had missed the workout. And he walks by me and he points at me and he says, "Where were you this morning?" That made all the Democrats very nervous. Like, what was it? No, I don't talk to Paul very much. I mean, frankly, I like Paul. I'm really disappointed in him because he has the opportunity, if he wants to work with Democrats, to put aside the crazy people in his party. I mean, he's got 30 or 40 people who are very doctrinaire. They complain about them all the time. All they have to do, we're in the new Dem caucus, Susan and I. There's 30 or 40 people who are willing to compromise with him on making the healthcare system better, not blowing it up, and making the tax code more competitive and fairer if they want to talk to us. But Paul has not taken that step. I think it's a real disappointment because he's the Speaker of the House of Representatives, not the Speaker of the Republican Party.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question regarding your concern about the environment and also your being pro-trade. And can you make a comment regarding specifically the investor state dispute settlement as it applies to trade agreements? Because I think that there's kind of a conflict between that and protecting the environment, where companies can sue governments for implementing reasonable laws to protect the environment and promote climate change, to fight climate change, for example. Like, I've heard that the company that is trying to pass the Keystone XL pipeline is suing the United States for
it's a totally academic argument because everyone was against the TPP. Sorry. So the question was, the gentleman's asking a question about one component of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement that President Obama negotiated. I personally believe it's tragic we didn't do that. We were giving up our leadership in Asia by not securing strong economic ties with those Asian countries. We don't leave ourselves with many options other than the military. It's a huge mistake. And the ISDS, the dispute resolution thing, I thought was a complete red herring. That we had been sued under that. We've had that kind of dispute resolution for many years in many agreements. The United States has never lost one. And back when Elizabeth Warren called me, I knew every case that had been settled under this thing. The dispute resolution was never the issue. And I just think it's just too bad. We could talk more extensively about that, why it came to that. But I analyzed that question very closely and just came to feel that all in all, that deal would have been really good for us and for the world. And now as I see what's happening in North Korea and I'm thinking of China's picking up these trade deals, our farmers are going to get hurt, our workers are going to get hurt. It's just a shame. And I'm disappointed, frankly, in Mrs. Clinton for not being more of an advocate.
Yeah, I mean, we left the playing field, basically, and I think that's a problem. We all can sort of imagine something terrible happening, but the reality is that is meant largely to protect our own companies here in the United States. I think there are a lot of reasons, I think, that the TPP went down the way that it did. And part of it really has to do with communication and how well people prepare folks for major agreements like that. Frankly, I think the Obama administration did a lousy job of it, as did perhaps, you would say the Congress. But it is a shame that we're now in the position where, we're really marginal when it comes to that.
Yes.
On the tax reform, it seems like there are thousands, if not millions, of pages of code, and some of them provide benefits to one or two companies or one or two people. How is it that Congress is focused in on the mortgage deduction, which applies probably to the greatest number of people in the state, in the country?
Well, the one reason is because it raises the most money. I mean, this is all about money. And so if you're trying to, well, if I'm going to be really cynical about this, if you're trying to help people who have the wherewithal and you'd like to send them more money, then you're going to take away from, average Americans who really get tax deductions from buying a home. And we all know how important that is in terms of equity and people being able to get ahead, frankly, and send their kids to college. A lot of us do that through our homes. So I just think that it's one thing that, if you're trying to look at a list of, and add the dollars up, that's the best place to look. But I don't see that happening, frankly, in the end. But I think the reality is I'm not sure I see anything happening, and that's the problem.
Ed.
Is there a willingness in Congress to work together to kind of roll back some of the Dodd-Frank legislation? That's what the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin's kind of brought up. It's kind of a little bit onerous to get a real estate loan these days.
I actually think Susan and I are two people who want to make it work. We're not scared of, look, when I ran for office, both Dodd-Frank and Obamacare had been passed. But I said, these are two major undertakings. It's a remaking of the healthcare system. It's a huge change in banking regulation. There's going to need to be adjustments. And that was fine with my colleagues until we actually talked about adjusting them. They are very defensive about it sometimes. But Susan and I are people, I think we're trying to be pragmatic. We're trying to make it work. We're trying to look at, preserve what's good about those laws, and then be honest about what's not working or what can be improved. And so, yeah, I think you'd find a lot of willingness to do that. Mm-hmm. Now, I would tell you that they overstep. Ed, what they do is they'll include 5 things you want to do and 4 things you can't do, and that's how not to make a deal.
Yeah, I just, when you mention that, I actually have a PTSD because
You were there.
because I will never ever forget this. That basically Secretary Paulson called the leader Pelosi, then Speaker Pelosi at that time, and we were literally going off the cliff. And so when you think about some of the changes that were made under Dodd-Frank, they probably were an overreaction in many ways. But the reality of what could have happened in this country and how we then work back from that, I think is pretty amazing, and it, you know, it's just, you're always going to make mistakes. I mean, we just cannot write a perfect bill. So I think it's always appropriate to think about major legislation that is evolving, just like the ACA. You know, it's got to evolve. 10 years from now, it probably won't look a lot like it looks today. I don't know what it's going to look like, and maybe the same for Dodd-Frank. So we've got to be willing to do that, but you've got to be willing to sit in a room with folks. And I mean, there were things happening at that time that were just outrageous, you know.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, when President Obama left office, he said he wanted to work on redistricting. I believe the last couple of election cycles, Democrats have won more votes in the House of Representatives than Republicans, but yet have many fewer seats. Do you know if anything is happening on that? Because it's frustrating also on the heels of the presidential election where the Democrats got more votes. It seems the majority of the country supports the Democratic agenda, but the Democrats are shut out of the House, the Senate, and the White House, despite having the majority of the voters behind them.
He and Eric Holder are working on some efforts to win state legislatures and governor's races so that they can do redistricting. You know, what we did in California worked pretty well. It is an honestly independent commission that drew lines without respect to incumbents. And if it hadn't been for that, I would never have made it. That and the open primary, I would never have made it into Congress. Parenthetically, the Democrats, who are in the majority in the legislature, won 5 seats from the Independent Redistricting Commission. We won 5 seats that we didn't have. I think it's because we competed on ideas better and we weren't so concerned about winning by big margins. So I think it's a good model. The other thing that we have to be conscious of, though, it's not all redistricting, it's the way people settle. So my friend Hakeem Jeffries, I asked him how much he won by. He said he had 90% of the vote. He says not so much Hakeem Jeffries, it's hard to find a Republican in Brooklyn. Yeah. So what the phenomenon is, too, is we have a lot of 70, 80, 90% districts because so many people are just aggregated around the big cities. And then other places have, 55% Republican. So that's part of it, too. But I think the redistricting is important, and the Voting Rights Act is a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, it gets back to the sorting a little bit in communities. But I have to say, listen, and I hope we have Republicans in the audience, actually. You know, please don't be shy out there. The reality is that they were very strategic. They have been strategic, more strategic than Democrats in many, many ways, of making sure that they were getting these seats at local and state levels. And that makes a difference over time. There have been a number of bills that have been like our commissioning bill. That should be universal. Yep. We should not have states that do things that differently. The other thing we do very, very differently is how people vote. People are not equally franchised in this country. You can't vote absentee in some states. You got to have different, weird excuses. I mean, there are a whole lot of things that are done like that, and yet, it's kind of states' rights, and so people don't want you to touch it.
Yes.
I just had a question about sort of the future of the Democratic Party in general.
Me too.
When Barack Obama was first elected in 2008, we saw a big shift in the way the Republican Party sort of looked at bipartisan politics, with Mitch McConnell saying, their primary objective was to prevent him winning a second term. And I think that we began to see something like that happening when President Trump was elected. And now it's a very different situation between President Obama and President Trump. But do you guys think, as Congressman, do you think that it's more beneficial to the Democratic Party in the long run to be a party of no, an anti-party against the Republican agenda, or to try to work with them to find something more beneficial? Will it hurt America in the long run to try to work with this sort of party, or will it be beneficial?
Well, I mean, personally, I always think it's better to, I'm a League of Women Voters person. I always think it's better to try and find that common ground when you can. Honestly, it's a little tough right now. to do that. So I don't think we should be known as the party of no. I think that we need to find it, but I also think we need to fight like hell when we feel that something is going wrong in the country. And you know, Scott did a great job of sort of laying that out. I mean, just when you think it can't get any worse, you know, something happens, and that was Charlottesville. And I mean, that's what's going on. And I think we have to really, you know, step in and say that's wrong, and we can't support that. But when it comes to some of the policy issues, I think we have to try and be at the table, and we have to hope that in a few years, if not sooner rather than later, that there's a change in governance in the country, and that's what we have to work for every day.
I would just talk about me as a Democrat. I start with civil rights. You can't really compromise on one person, one vote, on the ability of a woman to make her health care choices, I think, on the ability of people to love who they want, LGBT issues. And you just have to fight. You have to get more votes than them on that. And we do a pretty good job of holding the line. We could pick enough of them off to stop some of the bad stuff. I think that's where I start as a Democrat. I also feel like business problems have bipartisan solutions. So there's nothing particularly democratic about fixing a tax code so that it's fair and that we can make our companies more competitive, or healthcare in a way that provides healthcare for people in a way that it's accessible, both in fact and in effect with the cost of it. So I think that's where we have to be. That's our job, is to go stop bad stuff, but to look for agreement. I think in terms of the parties, the party that's going to win over time is the party that convinces you and people your age that we have the better plan for the future. I think we should be able to do that because we're right on education, we're right on climate. I think we're right on investing in the future and being optimistic about that. Time will tell whether we take advantage of it. I think there's a lot of issues in terms of the, how that's expressed. Who's speaking on TV for us may not be someone we always agree with, and I think that'll be sorted out too. But there's certainly an opportunity for the Democrats to propose, a better deal as its fashion. That's really a discussion about how to give people economic opportunity and security.
We've got time for maybe 2, 3 more, and just in fairness to both members of Congress. Jamie Reno first.
Hi guys, could you talk briefly about the VA and veterans? You guys may know me. I'm actually a working journalist. Not tonight, but I am taking notes because some of this is really interesting. I covered veterans for 20 years.
Okay. Yeah. We're doing our best. We're doing our best.
I'm not trying to scare you guys.
Let me take that one because I'm on the Veterans Committee right now,
yeah.
And I'll let
Susan
can have potluck on the next one.
Yeah, what's your question, Tom?
Scott, I just wanted to ask you,
sure.
I've covered veterans for 20 years at Newsweek.
Yeah.
I'm now at Healthline, which is the second largest health news site in the world, and we are really focused on veterans, and I've been covering veterans.
Right.
And Susan, you and I have spoken before, but maybe the number one irony of this administration, given all the disasters, if you will, is that we're seeing really positive progress at the VA with David Shulkin and among veterans. So I'm wondering, despite all the craziness that's going on right now, and all the departments and the cabinet members who are, borderline criminals, the VA and the veterans really seem to be moving in the right direction. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Well, I think you're exactly right. And please don't write a story about how great Shulkin is, or he'll get fired for overshadowing Trump. Look, the guy is fantastic. I think you got a few things that are going well. One is Shulkin is a great leader. He really understands it, and he's picked out priorities that we all agree with. Two is you got the leadership in both committees in the House and the Senate that's outstanding. And I got Phil Rose, a Republican doctor from Tennessee. He is really trying to work for veterans, and Tim Walz is his counterpart. They are not making it political. They're trying to depoliticize it. They work with the veteran service organizations. We made a lot of progress on accountability, on the Forever GI Bill, closing the loophole for Purple Heart veterans, just doing the stuff that if we all sat around and said, yeah, that's the right thing to do. And they've been working with the Senate at the same time. This never happens. So they're working with Tester and Isaacson, who are senators who lead and so we did the same bills. So it doesn't have to go back and forth. So there's real leadership in the Congress on that issue that makes a big difference. No one has, from the White House, has tried to inject politics in it. So the GI Bill thing that we did was a unanimous vote out of committee and a unanimous vote in the Congress, and all stuff that's really important to veterans, which is really important to San Diego. So I think that is a bright spot, and I'm happy to say that Secretary Shulkin was a great pick.
Here, and then Larry, and I think we'll end with Paul. Yes.
Can you address the issue of Trump's goal to ban transgender people in the military?
Sure.
Repeat.
Well, Secretary Mattis just basically told them to take a hike today, so that's a good thing. Basically put a freeze, which they've sort of done in terms of looking at some of the issues. But he made it very clear, as I understand it, that transgender individuals, members of the military who are serving today, shouldn't be worried and look over their, shoulder that someone's going to be pulling them out. I mean, I think he made that pretty clear. And I mean, the amazing thing he basically said is that, he basically said what Tillerson said. The president speaks for himself, doesn't speak for the country, doesn't speak for me. And so I think we're all counting on him to do a good, to continue. And I'm sure he. I shouldn't say this. Are there any reporters in the audience? I mean,
You're on YouTube.
That's right. I know that. But I do think that we actually
Just say off the record, Susan.
Actually, when he wakes up in the morning, I'm hoping that he feels like going to work that day because I think right now we really need him.
Look, it's the stupidest thing in the world. All volunteer Army, we're going to tell patriots who want to fight for their country and possibly die for their country that they can't fight because of the gender identity. That's why Mattis thinks it's stupid. That's why they're trying to push back on it. But again, this is speaking to the mob, and it's just wrong. It really makes me feel bad about where the country is. By the way, the rest of the world is not seeing us as a beacon either today because of stuff like this. The best they think of us is that we elected an idiot, and the worst they think is that America has changed, and that's really bad for us. This is another example of that.
Larry.
I just want to follow up. Being a veteran, I go to the VA in La Jolla, and I've been going there maybe 6 or 7 years, and I've had excellent care every time I've been there. The appointments have been on time. I get them when I want them. I see the right doctors, and everything is taken care of. So I have no problems with VA in La Jolla here. It's absolutely wonderful.
Good.
And speaking about the ACA and the Obamacare, I saw a poll recently where the people, I don't know where the poll was taken, but the majority of the people loved the ACA, but they hated the Obamacare.
Right. Everybody wanted us to take our hands off of Medicare too.
They didn't know what it was, so they were going to take it away. That's the problem.
And just a short follow-up. Back when this was done, back in 08 and 09, I don't understand. Joe Lieberman was against the Medicare for people at 55, jumping on at age 55 because of the insurance state. But why, we have a TRICARE system for the military, we have our Medicare system for our senior citizens, and we have a VA system. Why can't it be something that's kind of thrown on, what do you call it, backpacked on that? Or that
Piggyback.
Piggyback, right. To try to have something that's not so offensive to so many people.
Right. Susan, you were there.
He said backpack because he's from Marquette, Michigan.
Right.
Susan.
I think part of the difficulty is just like we have so many different pieces to this, and people somehow, people naturally like being a part of what they know. And what they know, most people know, is their insurance comes through their employer. And so part of what you're trying not to do is to disrupt that piece. I think there are a lot of people who are very interested. Public option was part of the ACA initially. They couldn't quite work it out, and in the end, that's where we came with trying to provide those subsidies under Medicaid Medi-Cal for us here in California. So I think things morph in different directions, and I think for now, I know that there's a lot of push and movement to try and do something different, but we've got to stabilize the market. We've got to try and make some corrections, and I think that if we could get there, then we can begin to focus on some others. But right now, I think it's sort of a distraction to think of really upending the whole thing.
The last question is going to go to Mr. Kruger.
I'd like to know your hopes, fears, and predictions about North Korea.
About what?
That's an easy one.
Yeah.
Specifically, where do you see the president going on?
I'll predict Trump's behavior.
Yeah. Well, so, asking about North Korea and what is likely to happen there. I actually had a chance to be in South Korea recently. We didn't go to the DMZ, but we were talking with folks there, and I think we've now seen the missile launched over Japan, and that becomes scarier and scarier. But in the end, I think, and I do appreciate that the Secretary Tillerson is really focused on a diplomatic solution here somewhere. And that's why we just cannot, I think, tear the State Department to shreds. Not that everybody there is working on South Korea, on the North Korea problem, but the reality is you've got to be training people. You've got to have the right people in positions across our globe that we have a national security interest in. And so I think sometimes, what I think is sort of not understood perhaps by the president is that all these things work together. And you can't just say, well, we'll all the options are on the table. There should be. I don't think they should not say that, but I think at least as I understand it, his words today were better than they have been in the past in terms of, sending rockets over immediately. So I think there are hopefully enough people around him, and, maybe they'll get a little more stabilized in North Korea. But it's a really tough problem because you're dealing with somebody who is not necessarily Well, that's the problem is we've got to, that's it. I mean, it's always funny when they talk about, the sort of strange hairdos. But it's a real serious issue, and obviously is one that all the neighbors and certainly all the United Nations are would like to see something reasonable come out of it. And I think some kind of a deal is a solution that might be in the offing if we can continue to keep conversations going.
I think, I agree with what Susan said. I would also add that one really important component of this is military-to-military conversations about where the lines are, not just military of North Korea and the United States, but also the Chinese military. Those communications have to be very clear, and sometimes the tweets really confuse that. I hope that people have learned to kind of ignore that. Maybe they have. But really, what's happened in the State Department is really of great concern to me because there's only so many tools in the diplomacy box, between state dinner and nuclear war. And we ought to take advantage of all of them, and all of them ought to be robust. And so I think we're certainly concerned about it. And we certainly think that Congress should play a role in discussing what the strategy is. So I do think it's always been a problem without a great solution. But again, the diplomacy is really important. The fact that the UN took those sanctions was good, and we have to continue to work on China and push China a little bit harder, I think, because 90% of what North Korea has comes through China. And other than that, the problem with North Korea is that Trump's giving them what they want, what he wants. He has the nuclear weapons. He takes away food from everybody to fuel the nuclear weapons, which he thinks maintains his regime. And when Trump says, I'm going to bomb you, it just tells the people of North Korea, yeah, we have to support the leader in these nuclear weapons. It's our only defense. So it's exactly counterproductive. And I think that's why a good State Department strategies are really important. And I think we'll continue to encourage that as part of the budgeting. That he wants to cut the budget. It doesn't make a lot of sense. it's not, so let's say it's not cost effective. Is this my last? I would just say I want to thank George Mitrovich, because George Mitrovich has always been very kind to me. And the City Club is a great service to this community. You are a great pillar of the community. I thank you for all you've done, and thank you every time for giving me an introduction only my mother would believe.
Are you sure that you would believe?
And the same for me, because really we have just a precious individual in George.
Thank you. I started in, I'm going to be brief, I started in politics in 1966 with Pat Brown. I worked for Bobby Kennedy. I worked for two extraordinary members of the Senate. When I look at those who run for public office, they have my greatest admiration and my greatest regard, whether running as a Democrat or a Republican, because they're willing to do it. People believe in things, and they're willing to run and be at risk. And as I said earlier on, I think in the city, we're lucky to have Susan Davis and Scott Peters among our congressional delegates. So let's extend to them our appreciation once more.